and closing remarks. Next slide. So taking this opportunity, we would like to give you a quick introduction about IAMAI and our partnering firm HERE Technologies. Internet and Mobile Association of India is a not-for-profit industry body representing the complete gamut of digital services industry in India. We have over 330 Indian and multinational corporations as members from various segments for our sector-specific committees like digital transformation, digital advertising, edutech, fintech, gaming, etc. In case you need any additional information on how you can be a part of IAMAI and its initiatives, you can visit our website, www.iamai.in. HERE Technologies, a location data and technology platform, moves people, businesses, and cities forward by harnessing the power of location. By leveraging an open platform, it empowers the customers to achieve better outcomes, from helping a city manage its infrastructure or a business optimize its assets to guiding drivers to their destination safely. To learn more about HERE, please visit www.here.com. I would like to thank HERE Technologies, who is a partner for this roundtable discussion. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Shatnik Goswami, Director, Deloitte Digital, who will moderate today's discussion. Joining us today, we have a distinguished set of leaders from the electric vehicle sector in India. Please welcome Mr. Abhijit Sengupta, Director and Head of Sales, Southeast Asia and India, HERE Technologies. Mr. Ashwin More, Technical Lead, Meru Mobility Tech. Karthikeya Haryani, Founder and CEO, Texo Charge Zone. Ramesh Dorai Rajan, Head Sales Marketing and Customer Care, Electric Vehicle Business Unit, Tata Motors. Rishabh Shah, Co-Founder, CityFlow. Shri Priya, GM and Head of Product, Vehicle IoT and Data Platform, Ether Energy. Saliza Sapto, APAC Product Marketing Lead, HERE Technologies. Vineet Sharma, Founder and CEO, FleetX.io. Vaibhav Raja, Director, Napino Auto and Electronics. And lastly, Yogendra Verma, CTO, Cars on Rent. Next slide, please. To start with, Ms. Saliza from HERE Technologies team will take us through the role of location in enabling a sustainable transportation ecosystem. Over to you, Saliza.
Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to everyone. My name is Saliza Sapto. I am Senior Product Marketing Lead from HERE Technologies. It is my honor and pleasure to be presenting to all of you today a brief session on HERE Technologies and our impact and contributions towards making a sustainable transportation ecosystem. Now, in the next few minutes, I would like to provide you some ideas and even proof points on how location can make a big impact to your business and why HERE Technologies location data and platform is different from what you may be using today, more so towards our aim of a sustainable transportation ecosystem. And we can see here that now global warming and air pollution are the growing concerns around the world. Now, APAC has a huge challenge that every year for many weeks or even months, large countries like India, Indonesia, Thailand, and China are covered by toxic haze. And smaller island nations must deal with rising seawater levels due to global warming. The growth in e-commerce, complex supply chains with increasing demands on urban mobility are forcing stakeholders to rethink transportation and business models. Working towards a more sustainable transportation ecosystem is in need of the hour. While the impact of climate change is an important conversation happening across the mobility ecosystem, achieving sustainable development goals is proving to be more difficult than expected. In addition, a worldwide pandemic, as we are facing right now, is both impeding progress and proving the need for safe and sustainable mobility. For example, with freight volumes expected to multiply in the next few years, both public and private sectors must join forces to optimize distribution models and sustainable transport. We must now think of our social duty in balancing customer demand and sustainable transportation in the transport ecosystem. Now, I believe the electrification of our personal vehicles and commercial fleets is important to achieve a sustainable transportation state. Now, the good news is that there is an increased momentum in this becoming a reality. Because first, The EV vehicles are now becoming more affordable. And second, the user experience is getting better, with the primary concern of battery range that are being addressed. Now, if we look into the demand side of things, this chart reflects in the buying sentiments of customers. In average of September 2020 last year, a report mentioned that about 50% of all potential car buyers interviewed say they are now considering buying a battery EV. And this number is much higher in larger countries like India and China. And we look into the supply side of things. Now, despite COVID-19 pandemic having a major impact on two-wheeler, electric two-wheeler market will gain momentum as economy recovers. New players and newer models from existing OEMs are expected to boost sales further. Now, geographically, if you dig deeper into the global electric vehicle powertrain market, the APAC region will actually spearhead the market over the forecast period in the next few years. And this is what is being mentioned even in a recent McKinsey report, that understanding specific local needs for early demand and adaptation will be the key to making effective targeted investment, matching demand and supply, and enabling quick returns of investment. However, there are multiple challenges that must be overcome to ensure sustained growth in EV adoption. So let's say we look across the value chain from mobility providers, infrastructure providers, tech enablers, and even city authorities. Now, the key challenge is to match the demand of charging the electrical vehicles with the supply of charging infrastructure. Now, this demand and supply matching is also one of the biggest problems in adoption and usage of EV vehicles. And for us in HERE Technologies, when we look into providing a solution for EV, we start with a platform that provides seamless access to enterprise-grade location data in a standardized format from HERE, as well as from external and third-party data providers, such as sensor data, maybe even from your company. So a scalable location platform can be instrumental in matching this demand generated by the EV drivers to the supply from the charging infrastructure. Now, HERE's platform provides access to HERE's own location data and services, as well as allowing third-party players to host and distribute their location assets via HERE Marketplace. Now, all this static and dynamic data is then aggregated and delivered via HERE's location services to the end consumers and businesses. And we have other products besides EV charging stations, but first look at this. Now, we have a global database set of EV stations, and this provides not only static information like pricing and connector types, but also the dynamic availability of charging station in certain countries. Because for our charging infrastructure providers, this is what a great service is about, because it helps to distribute to your latest network details to your end target drivers via real time, and is secure and a global EV charging service. Now, we have APAC coverage for about 78,000, and of course, most of it is located in North Asia. But we can see there's a lot more happening within ASEAN and India region to have charging infrastructure being built. And the other part of it is range anxiety. Now, there's a natural human reaction, right, called anxiety. With the conversion from normal fuel to electric vehicle, we want to ensure and assure our drivers that we can reduce this anxiety. Now, in HERE, we provide access through this solution, providing drivers information and features on HERE routing that has the fastest route, customizing towards consumption model by the vehicle, the EV vehicles. Where the stations, where are they equipped with fast and slow charging points? And through the above factors, providing the optimum route that matches the battery level with the routes, which is remaining before the destination, and the preferred infrastructure providers as well. And at the same time, within the EV routing, we provide consumption calculation. Now here, if you can see the diagram above, it shows on the blue range where it is still reachable within the existing battery consumption. Whereas once it gets towards orange, it starts to give you a warning that battery will become low in this segment. And red, of course, it means that something has to be done. And if we look into the chart below, the map in purple, we can also visualize them in an isoline routing because you can see the difference of reachability with EV and traffic data. Here you can see that traffic in Mumbai is always high. So there's not much difference that we can use as an example here to show the difference. But there is a lot of examples difference that if we show in other countries. And we also provide a multi-stop routing example. Now on the right, you can see the elevation plot for the route, which is also being taken into account, formulated by the orange line, whereas the purple line indicates the battery charging level. And this gives some kind of an assessment to the drivers on where they should start calculating their route and even stops. Now, what we want to bring here is that from us in HERE Technologies, we have decades of mapping and routing expertise. And HERE is able to provide information about the range an EV can cover and most effective routing that an EV vehicle can perform with the battery consumption. Now, all of this together reduces the driver's fear of running out of charge and enhance the driver's experience. And to summarize, HERE is definitely committed to enabling a sustainable transportation system by addressing both supply and demand side of the EV ecosystem through its location platform offering. So if you're an EV infrastructure provider, an EV transportation service provider, an OEM, or even a policymaker, we would love to partner with you in enabling and scaling up further greener rides for consumers and fleets. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to our moderator, Mr. Shatnik Goswami, for the panel discussion on EV challenges and opportunities for adoption. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sulaiza. Greetings, my fellow panelists. Welcome everybody who are on this webinar. Great to have you here. We have a very exciting discussion up ahead. But before that, just a few sort of pointers. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A chat. We will take it up towards the end. While putting your questions, do mention, give a small introduction, which firm you are from. And then, we'll route it to our appropriate panelist. The way, as we discussed earlier, we will spend about, 50 minutes discussing this, and then we will get into Q&A. I have a very exciting sort of power-packed panel. But before we get into this discussion, just a few thoughts from my side. So Deloitte has been doing this survey on auto consumer behavior for the last about 10 odd years. 2021 survey was kind of interesting. And so in line with what Sulaiza mentioned earlier. So on the whole EV piece, Indian customers overwhelmingly chose two sort of points as their main area of concern. One of that was around the cost of the vehicle. Then associated to that is the charging infrastructure. So that was the charging infrastructure was essentially number one. And, how do we get to it, given that, especially in the big cities, often you don't even have dedicated parking. Cars are parked haphazardly on the road. And the second, and in which case India is kind of interested in breaking away from the other major Asian geographies, was around the safety of such EV systems. So what I'll do in the panel today is that I'll pick the panel's brain in terms of one, how do we get the infrastructure up and running? How do we address the security, safety concerns? Then we'll delve into a little bit of some of those fleet efficiency angles. Obviously, location tech plays a disproportionate impact, and we see a lot of our, especially our large B2B kind of clients, where logistics is a big cost. How do you optimize your fleet efficiencies? How do you optimize for time? How do you figure out where is that inventory that you're expecting? Should you plan for example, have a backup because I see it as certain blockages on the way? Even in case of pilferage management, as an example. And obviously, EV will bring much lower cost of running, given the fuel prices and the simple mechanics of electric cars, which mechanically are simpler than the current EV systems. And in the final segment, I will talk a little bit in terms of what are the consumer behavior changes that will drive, and where are the opportunities in that B2C space for the whole smart mobility to come together and deliver increasing value. So what I'll do is I will start with Mr. Karthikeya. Given that EV infrastructure has been the single biggest element of concern, and just as a number, we covered overall 8 points. EV infrastructure as a concern was at 26%, safety was at 25%, and the next highest was 16%. So obviously these two are the dominant sort of fears in Indian consumers' mind. So Karthikeya, just coming to you. As somebody who's working in this charging infrastructure space, I wanted to hear your views on what are some of those bigger challenges in setting up these kind of infrastructure in India, and what are the potential opportunities for example, property managers. You look at big retail players who are providing office spaces or housing societies. So a little bit in terms of last mile challenges and the opportunities.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Shatanik. It's a very prudent question and probably the most famous point of discussion across various forums in terms of challenges and opportunities in setting up the EV charging infrastructure. Now, one thing is very clear, that EV is here to stay. E-mobility is here to stay. That's one thing. So, having said that, here we are in terms of let's see the demographics. Now, if you take US, an average American drives 80 miles a day. An average Indian doesn't clock more than 30 kilometers a day. So if I'm owning an electric car or a scooter, a home charging solution should ideally be enough for me, to charge my vehicle, whether I'm living in a gated community or at my office and so on. I'm rarely going to use a public charger within a city limit. Similarly, if I'm going to take the same car into an intercity transport, intercity travel, I will need a public charging infra, on a midpoint or at a dhaba on the roadside, etc. So India as a country, we call it Indian problem, Indian solution. So it is very unique to our country that the challenges of EV charging infra be overcome by a combination of various things. It cannot be just one, plain vanilla formula out here. So as ChargeZone, we're working on a hypothesis, what we call as into the B2C space, wherein we work with gated communities, hotels, motels, hospitals. In other words, those locations where the charge is the average time of parking of a car or a car just staying put for a while is say 3 hours or more. So there you can address it through what we call medium fast charging or level 2 charging as it is called. The other part of that hypothesis in a B2C domain is the intercity travel. So you got to put up a public charging, a fast DC charging, spots or fast DC charging points to address the range anxiety of the EV owners or EV drivers. So having said that, there are this combination of opportunities which are available for all stakeholders. So there are DISCOMs, there are EV charging company like us, CPOs. Then there are real estate, segment players, could be brokers, could be property owners, could be gated communities. So there are, as I said, it's a multi-dimensional, multifaceted ecosystem, which has to put all their efforts into place to create a kind of a ubiquitous EV charging network within the country.
Thanks, Karthikeyan, for that. I'll come to you, Rameshji. I mean, Karthikeyan mentioned, lot in terms of, how India could respond in terms of charging infrastructure, especially with, urban mobility. Now, Tata Motors obviously does commercial vehicles as well as the normal, passenger vehicles. Now I know your EV right now is probably more focused on the consumer segment, but I wanted to pick your brains into one is what are the adoption challenges with manufacturers bringing more EVs into the market, and what can I mean, I'll be specifically interested from you in hearing on what can the government do more to aggressively champion EV adoption. I know, I mean, there is the FAME policy, but I'm sure industry has a lot more inputs to give there.
So thanks, and good afternoon to everyone. So I think our learning journey over the past couple of years, and then we've been closely tracking it, and we have come to a conclusion that some of the major challenges that needs to be addressed if you've got to get this adoption in place is the first thing is the commercial viability, and that's probably one of the most critical things that we need to look at if we have to improve the adoption of EVs. Now, from Tata Motors' perspective, this entire thing of the EV as a product launch, etc., was thought of somewhere about 15 years back in 2006 at our design center in London. And from then, we have been delaying this because we still did not know as to what is the right time to launch this product in India. So the first thing was the commercial viability, whether it will be a viable proposition. The second was a requirement of a special skill set. It can't be like a carbon copy, cut and paste of what you do in an ICE vehicles, etc. It's got to be nurtured separately. It's a niche segment. So we needed to understand that what is the special skill set, etc., that were needed to adopt this. The third challenge that we have to look at it that, again, as I said, you can't just Xerox an European model and put it in India. So it has got to be tuned to the Indian condition, the Indian way of driving, the Indian way of managing the traffic, etc. We found that the EV needs an image makeover. So it's not that EVs are very new. It's not that Tata Motors launched. EVs are there for probably 10, 15 years. We had different models, etc. But then those used to be slightly leisure vehicles. People just used to think that, okay, it's a slow moving vehicle, etc. If you have to keep up with time, we needed to understand that the image makeover had to be complete. It had to be a way by which people could get transported from one place to another. Then the other challenge that we had is that personal segment was very important. Now we are present in both the segment. We are present in the fleet segment. We are also present in the personal segment. But the challenges in both this is completely different. It's completely different. What the personal segment customer generally want is a pleasure of driving. He wants to see to it that his family is safe. He wants to ensure that he does not have to worry about the overall cost of ownership, etc. Whereas for a fleet segment, the challenges are completely different. For him, it's earn and pay. So he looks at more from a commercial aspect rather than from a driving ease aspect, etc. And the final thing is that establishing of EV is not only about selling vehicles. And if you have to ask me, see, this was throttled because of 5 major barriers. Unavailability of options is one. Range anxiety. You could look at unavailability of charging infra, unavailability of financing from banks, and the economic viability of electric vehicles vis-a-vis the ICE vehicles. So what we have found over a period of time is that how do we overcome all these challenges? How do we ensure that all these things are put in place? And I think we did a lot of customer profiling. We found out over a period of time that the customers to whom we cater to with this segment of vehicles are generally 3 types. One is the performance seeker who wants to have a vehicle for driving pleasure, sporty handling, etc. The second is the maintenance seeker who looks at overall cost of ownership. And the third is the true environmentalist who really wants to say, I want to contribute to reduction of pollution, etc. I want to do this. So these are the 3 type of customers that whom we have found that over a period of time. Inke, what was your second question? You divided it into 2 halves. The second question dealt with what do you want the government to do?
Yeah.
Today we have a FAME policy. Obviously, there needs to be more of improvement, and we want the government intervention probably in 2 sectors. One is on the incentives that they give, there needs to be a fair bit of standardization across. Today, you have different policies with different governments. So it would be good if we have a standard policy. And of course, many of the governments, I can tell you, are very, very keen to be very, very friendly to this electric vehicle adoption. The second is that I think there is a huge amount of work that the government can also contribute in terms of putting up charging units. We recently read in the paper that ESL was proposing to put up charging station. The government wants to put up. Every day we see government announcements, the Delhi government, the Maharashtra government, all of them wanting. We want a quick adoption of that because according to me, in case we are able to get the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure in place, then I think getting EVs out on the roads, the challenges will be much lesser than what it is probably today. And last but not the least, I just wanted to tell you that even in housing societies, etc., for example, for every passenger car Nexon that we sell, we put up a charging unit at the customer's house. So if he stays at an independent house or whether it is a flat, a charging unit is, of course, that's a slow charging. We have tied up with Tata Power, who also help us in putting chargers wherever the societies are willing to give them space and power. Of course, the commercials can be worked out between them, but we are beginning to see that also taking place, also in the corporate offices. So we are working closely with them. So these are some of the things that if you're able to overcome these challenges, I'm very sure that EV adoption will be pretty simple in India. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Ramesh. And Supriya, I'll come to you just for any perspective that you as a two-wheeler space manufacturer has something which you want to add on to what Ramesh just mentioned.
Sure, I think a lot of good points have been covered. So a couple of things that we have observed, it is from our experience in the two-wheeler segment, right? So as everybody knows, when we talk about charging, there are two kinds. One is the home charging, which is usually the slow charging, takes anywhere from 3 to 5 hours to charge up to 80%. And then there's the public fast charging. So public fast charging, one of the biggest challenges for us has been a definition of the standards, and that enables that interoperability, right? We are not at the luxury of taking the European standards or any other global standards because the Indian temperature conditions, etc., are different. In India, a majority of the vehicles are actually two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which are primarily low voltage, low current requirement segment. So adopting any of the international challenges standards does not even work commercially. But today we do not have that kind of a standard. As Ather, we eventually went ahead and created our own proprietary charging public charging infrastructure. So working towards such a standard is probably going to be an immense game changer in this segment. Coming to home charging part, we also offer a home charger with every vehicle for every customer. The interesting insights we observed was that despite offering that, this is a huge mental block or barrier for the customers to buy, because there is certain cultural and societal aspects, right? I live in a rented apartment. Will my owner allow? Do I have to talk to RWA or any other government agency? Why, these are all steps of frictions that customer has to overcome to actually even consider that should I go and visit a showroom. So forget about even coming to the showroom and getting an explanation of how this installation works. So because it is not seen as a utility, so this is the B2C consumer side, like a consumer behavior side barrier that we have seen, and something obviously waiting to be solved.
Sure. No, thanks, Supriya. So I'll come now to Vaibhav. Now I know research is one of your passions. Both from this need for standardization that our earlier panelists talked about, and also from that second biggest sort of concern in the Indian sort of EV adopters around the safety of the cars. Would love to pick your brains on how do you allay some of these concerns that the customers have, that EVs are inherently not as safe as ICE, which is basically carrying a whole tank of gasoline behind it.
Yeah. So safety, of course, in the mind of people, like you said, there are two major concerns, which is one is, of course, the range anxiety, which a lot of OEMs have been, addressing those concerns. And the second, of course, is safety, which is there have been a lot of examples on roads which have been, actually fueling the concern of the people, which have been recently addressed but needs to be fully addressed. Of course, there has been standardization and different standards of quality, like ISO 62662, which has been adopted, the functional safety criteria, which from my experience as a supplier to these OEMs have not been as stringent for the IC engine, which is now been coming to the EV. So those standards have been coming. Apart from this, a lot of research has been happening on a solid state battery system, which is far away speaking. But from a government point of view, I think government should also encourage, apart from the manufacturing, government should also encourage a lot of research to happen in India, and needs to incentivize industry to do these research also. And I think solid state batteries is a real a much safer option compared to the current systems. Apart from that, safety is also in terms of security, and for this cyber security, as you see, almost all of the EVs that will be coming in would have some form of a cloud connection that will be happening, either through a lot of BMS data or other motor controller data have been going, which is prone to of course hacking, and that makes things even more riskier from a different point of view rather than fire safety. It is from a data breach, and also from a accident prone point of view also. So safety is important criteria, I think so, and which has been addressed but needs more attention.
And in terms of the supply of talent, if India is to become, let's say, a battery powerhouse, today I think we import most of our batteries and battery tech. Do you think that ecosystem exists, and if we had the right push from the government and the other OEMs, the research capabilities itself could be scaled up?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of excitement, a lot of research being done, a lot of business plan being made, till at a ground level, but it still has to come up from as an ecosystem development point of view. Of course, COVID has made things slower in the last 2 years from that perspective. Government is doing a lot of things. I mean, EV, apart from the main challenge of environment, second, the most reason that the government wanted to adopt EVs much faster as it can in India is to reduce the petroleum and diesel imports, which is from exchange fluctuation, from a country dependency point of view, a huge criteria for the government that they have to solve. So from that perspective, I think a lot of local manufacturing still has to happen. A lot of import reduction also has to happen. We have to see what materials India is rich in, and try to adopt those materials for battery. As lithium is, or a lot of these cobalt is also been in different countries, have been owned by different specifically 1 or 2 countries. I won't name it over here, but so the dependency, of course, increases on them.
Yeah. No, thanks, Vaibhav, for that. So what I'll do is we'll shift the gears now towards the consumption side of the story, and I'll come to you, Vineet. Now we know the fleet operations can potentially be the big drivers for the early adoption of mobility. Can you share with us how is location tech, for example, enabling smarter fleet operations? And if there are some interesting stories that others can learn from, if you could share some of those.
Sure. So I'll keep the context a little bit related to mostly B2B segment, transportation and logistics, because we believe that, if a large trend needs to come of EV in India, right, especially, I think that will come from that particular segment as well. So I think how rapidly EV technology is growing in vehicles across the globe, the need for the smart fleet management solution is also growing in the same proportion. And I think we as a company, which is a smart fleet management company based on the IoT data, right? I think we are also riding in the same direction and started working on some of those challenges of which a particular fleet owner will, you can say, face. So a typical fleet owner who actually, let's say, need to handle, let's say 50 vehicles or 100 vehicles, right? He will need to have a lot of challenges, although he is getting a lot of efficiency benefits, low maintenance benefits compared to the ICE vehicles. But if there are other challenges as well, which he needs to take care of in terms of getting the real-time alerts regarding the battery status, when the battery is dying, what is the range left, and let's say, what is the efficient route planning, let's say, where I think we can definitely use, you can say, product like HERE, right, where they can actually help us in terms of real location of the EV charging infrastructure, right, where we can actually tell a particular vehicle or driver that, okay, you don't need to charge at this particular, you can say, EV station, you can still go and actually use the next station for the charging. And obviously for the fleet owner, for the better planning of their vehicles, they need to have insights regarding that how much range is left in a particular vehicle in terms of the battery, and where you can actually plan it better. Because typically, if you look at the data from the, let's say, typical truck logistic vehicle, they usually want to run at least 400 to 500 kilometers in a day, right? Especially on the intercity movement, right? So they need to have a, you can say, a clear visibility around where they need to fill up, or maybe how much time they will take in the fill up, right? Because their TAT and the overall delay management is also important. So I think there are a lot of challenges around that as well, which we were thinking in that direction to solve as a fleet management company with the help of IoT sensors and the analytics on top of it. And I think we have also started working on towards, I think the most of the adoption in India actually has happened on the two-wheelers or the three-wheeler side. So we are working with a couple of customers on the trial basis, like you can say three-wheeler EV makers and two-wheeler EV makers, where with the IoT analytics and actually trying to extract the health out of the vehicle, we are building some interesting analytics on top of it. But I think there are some challenges which I would like to highlight here as well. If you look at in the ICE vehicles, there are standard, you can say, data points which are across the OEMs they need to follow, right? And which they expose through the OBD plug and play ports in every vehicle they are manufacturing, using which our technology enabler like us can actually extract that data from any sort of vehicle, irrespective of the model, and build the analytics on top of it, which can actually help the fleet owners. But here in EV, I think there is no such standard as such, where you can say every OEM is actually exposing the same data with the same data points along with the similar standards, right? So if I need to know that what is the current battery health in terms of how much it has actually damaged, or maybe what is the overall life left, right? That is something which we were not able to identify as of now, unless we actually integrate and specifically, you can say, talk to a particular OEM, right? So there is a need for a standardization in terms of how OEMs are actually working on that data and can actually expose that data for third-party technology enabler for the better use of the data and insights.
So I see the standardization coming as a sort of a need coming up in just about every conversation. But I'll just continue the same story for one more bit and pick your brains, Ashwin. Obviously, enterprise mobility is typically where I see it. The smart mobility will actually get adapted. So what are the innovations happening from the enterprise mobility space that makes you really excited about the whole outlook, for basically smart mobility in India?
Sure. Thank you, Satnik, and thank you, team, for inviting me over here, and good evening to all of you. So yes, firstly, I'm very positive in terms of the outlook of how enterprise mobility would grow in short terms, right? I know this situation of COVID had been very disappointing and disheartening for all of us over here. And when I particularly talk about mobility as a sector, it has been a very dampener and disastrous for all of us over here. But silver lining is, I'm talking with a lens of cab aggregator or point of view of a logistic last mile delivery perspective. there are few silver linings where we are trying to innovate. At Meru, Mahindra, we tried to innovate and we had worked on 2 or 3 projects. But one live project, or this is interesting, I would like to discuss more on this. We did cross utilization of cabs, the passenger fleets. Also, these cabs were used for goods supply. So this was the first time where we used a passenger fleet. I'm talking about a mix of both EV as well as the ICE engines were used for goods supply. So now typically last year during the peak, we saw a humongous rise in digital orders being mapped to the e-tailers. When we were doing a Reiki, we saw with one of a major retailer order going to a size of almost around 3.5 lakhs to 4 lakhs per day compared to a rough order of 90,000 to maximum of 1.2 lakhs per day. So this completely choked the last mile delivery scheme. And there we saw that this situation could be a gap could be worked around, because mobility as a business, enterprise as a business was completely on a down, and we thought this could be a revenue generating opportunity for our driver partners to keep their livelihoods alive. So then we started interacting with Flipkart partners like Flipkart, Walmart, Amazon, so on and so forth. One critical point which came to notice was, we all know that last mile as a delivery as a concept is very expensive, and traditionally the most expensive leg of this supply chain is last mile delivery, which I'll quote a figure. It roughly, this is a actual ground figure which talks about 45 to 51% of the actual cost. Now there we thought we could arrest this situation. Now, when the industry is typically using a ICE engine, they say they have a particular, I won't quote that number, but they have a per kilometer costing on this. So we thought there is a light wherein if we could use EV vehicles, even though one thing which was against us was the goods carrying capacity. Normally that is less for a fleet passenger vehicle, right? So we thought this could be arrested by giving them a cheaper option of EV for last mile delivery part. And this worked really well. And I can confidently say that during that particular duration, we did around 1.5 lakhs of delivery during that particular peak. This was particularly for Flipkart. We trained the drivers, we encouraged them to understand how to fit in the shoes of a Flipkart delivery agent. Many customers who were willing to get into this particular space. Now, talking about innovation, I can particularly sense that this particular market as a whole could work in favor of everybody. Now, what I'm talking about, it is the e-tailers, it is the cab aggregators, also the OEMs. Now, why do I say that? By cab aggregators, I'll have multiple duties, both in terms of moving the passengers as well as the goods carrying. E-tailers, I'll reduce their last mile delivery cost. And third, for OEMs, I know this is in a very nascent stage, but there are a lot of companies. One of the startups in US, Cano, they are working on MPDVs. Now, for the audience's ease of understanding, MPDVs are multi-purpose delivery vehicles. So these are used predominantly for delivering goods, as well as could be used for passenger commutes. So this entire space gets open up and is win-win to all. Now I'm talking all goody, but there are a lot of challenges like government regulations, people, as in passengers and driver partners, as in their challenge to get acclimatized to this particular ecosystem. So also the current apprehension of auto manufacturers to venture into this particular ecosystem. So there are, but I could sense and what we have experienced last year, there is a room for a new segment altogether, be it for a cab aggregator or for auto manufacturers. I see with EVs coming in, cost definitely has to go less, and this is my perspective on what we have experienced last year. Yeah.
No, very interesting, Ashwin. Yogendra, I'll come to you now. I wanted to get your insight in terms of how are these location-enabled services, location intelligence, if we may call it that, are changing the consumer mindset itself. What kind of innovations then, you see the transport services then sort of bring to the ground transport experience, so that those sort of preferences of the customers tie in well with your growth strategy.
Sure. So, let me just, because Ashwin has talked a lot about the last mile. And as a consumer, let me just give you a perspective that, this location intelligence, more sustainable ways of transportation, they're not just a question of preference now. It is a dire need. And let me put that in perspective from a first-hand example. So I use Swiggy a lot. And, when I downloaded this app, I just, carelessly set my home location. I was somewhere in the middle of my house. I just set that location there. And every time, in first few months, whenever the delivery guy would come, he would be in the back lane. And he would call me up that, and there'll be a confusion. Then I ask him to come to the front gate. He'll again, take a round of the entire block, come there. Looks like a, trivial thing that, just a few minutes. But then somewhere I read, and it was a quite credible report, that in India, we waste around $10 billion to $14 billion just in the wastage in last mile because of this wrong mapping of geocodes, addresses, and all. And you can imagine the carbon footprint that we would be adding because of this redundant, travel and all that. So, it's imperative for us that, we start thinking about location tech revolution, about this EV revolution, and it's a dire need. And if I talk about our segment, Carzon as a shared mobility partner, so there, if we think from the perspective of an individual consumer, I would be frankly admitting that they are not yet bothered. They have not created this preference that they want an EV, for example, for the transportation, for personal transportation. But definitely, if we talk about corporates, because they have that that mandate of environmental and those areas, so that's why they have started asking us about if we could say offer EV for even for people transportation. But then when you are in shared mobility, there are a lot of challenges. You are continuously worried about high asset utilization and optimizing costs, and you write literally complex algorithms to optimize that routing so that your vehicle is always running and derive the last things. But adding this EV thing, particularly in the current landscape when there is lack of infrastructure, it has made the problem highly complex. See, you already were worried about making your cab reach your consumer, because you had to you have to take the quality of service to quite high levels. You are using all sort of location intelligence to do that. And then when EV element comes into the picture, you have to further make the routing complex, because you have to think about the current state of charge in the vehicle, and then how it's going to be reaching a charging station maybe during the trip, post the trip, before the trip. So all those elements, because the infrastructure is not yet there extensively available, that is making it difficult. And that's why maybe I believe even the consumer is not much thinking about it. So I guess we'll have to do a lot of in these areas, again, government helping, pitching in for improving the infrastructure, and then only maybe a shift in the consumer mindset of using these sustainable ways that could really, become a reality, I believe.
Interesting. So I think I'll just move to Rishabh. Now, Rishabh, as somebody who lives in NCR, and I remember there used to be a time when you're getting out of Cyber City, it used to take 40 minutes just to reach from parking till the exit gate. Obviously, the whole sort of app-based mobility services have seen a lot of excitement, around them. Just wanted to pick your brains in terms of, one is, what trends are you seeing around this whole, adoption of urban mobility? And then also, if you could talk about, one, the scale-up challenges, And then the other thing I wanted to bring in, most of whatever we talked about, except last mile connectivity for fleets, seems to be an urban problem. Do you see, for example, firms like you actually going beyond urban boundaries at all? Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Shatanik. So I think, yeah, from your personal experience, one of the points that you've raised is really valid in terms of what trends we see from the consumer also, right? And the consumer is evolving from even over the last 5 years since we started CityFlow. The trends we see now are very different from what we saw when we started, right? And I think one of the key trends that we see is that there is the bar set for reliability for mobility services, be it us or be it cab aggregators, has become much higher. Whereas because earlier it was still a new concept, now I think everyone's become familiar with the concept, and from availability it has now moved to reliability, right? Where it's really becoming an alternative to the personal mode of transportation. And if you want to substitute your personal mode with a mobility service provider, it puts a lot of pressure on us as a mobility service provider to ensure that that reliability, availability, punctuality is there for the consumer, right? And that's where the location tech and the smart mobility sort of comes in. In fact, 90% of it would be invisible to the consumer in terms of what we provide, right? Be it like Yogendra spoke about making the vehicle available and the complex routing algorithms that we have, or even in terms of handling your edge cases and your scenarios of breakdowns, etc. Preventive maintenance. And in fact, we are one of the consumers of FleetX and Vineet, where most of the data that Vineet provides to us goes into preventive maintenance. So actually foreseeing and forecasting the problems that could happen and trying to avoid them. Right. And the second thing, so reliability is one major trend that I see. The second trend that I would speak about is that experience, right? Customer experience. So no one wants to drive in traffic anymore. No, like Indians end up spending, especially in our cities, about more than 2 to 3 hours per day in traffic, which ends, when you add it up, ends up to about 1 month of your life in a year, 1 month a year in traffic, right? According to the traffic index, the top 3 of the top 10 global cities with the highest traffic density are in India, be it Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore. And what consumers have realized that you can't get away from traffic. I mean, there's no magic solution to get you to your office or to your home faster. But what you can do is you can make better use of that time, right? And which is where, again, mobility service providers come in, where instead of spending that time behind the wheel, you could actually hail a cab or use CityFlow, a CityFlow bus, and then use that time more productively, right? So people have become more sensitive of customer experience. And this is where, and this is a different angle. Besides the cost of EVs, this is where EVs will also bring in additional benefits, because they provide a much better ride experience, because there's no moving parts like that are there in an ICE vehicle. So the vibrations are lower, the vehicles are more silent, the maintenance and the reliability is higher. So we foresee that one of the reasons, besides cost, obviously, and that is the big elephant in the room, is going to be that the ride experience is actually going to become better for the consumers, right? And in terms of the second part of your question, right, in terms of the scale-up challenges and whether we'll sort of be able to move out of the urban centers of the country, I honestly don't see that happening in the next probably 5 to 10 years. The major reason is that urban cities in India are really rapidly growing and extremely underpenetrated when it comes to smart mobility solutions, right? So I think the challenge still is to focus, especially when you bring in the infrastructure challenges that everyone has spoken about. It's going to be much easier to do this in the urban centers because you have the demand density, and sort of solve for that first. And once the costs start becoming extremely viable and the penetration in the urban centers is high, is when I see that the next wave of sort of expansion that will happen to your semi-urban centers.
Sorry. Thanks, Sujam. Ramesh, just wanted to get your sense on this as well. Obviously, when I understand urban areas themselves are growth areas, under-penetrated. But given your experience with Nexon and the whole space, do you see that changing, given the fact that EVs are inherently simpler to maintain? Probably better, torque ratios as well. Do you see a demand coming from the non-urban areas for EV?
I do. At Tata Motors, when we started this entire Nexon EV project, and then we went put these vehicles on the roads, we started off in a small way. Even today, we are not present across the country. We are not there in all the states and union territories. We are present only in about 50 plus cities, 53, 55 cities where we are present. But even when we launched the vehicle, for example, Bombay was one of the cities. Among the first 100 customers, there were at least 5 customers who were from places like Nasik, Latur, wanting to buy a vehicle and drive it there. Now, one was the fair thing that people were aware of this, that there is a launch that has happened. It's not here. And obviously, you could only give them a home charging solution, nothing more. So what we did at that point of time, we took the customer through the entire thing and we said, you just wait for some more time. And once we open up the cities, we will start ensuring that the vehicles are supplied. So at this point of time, what we also have in place is a micro market strategy. There are certain markets wherein we go fairly deep into it, study the market and see as to how quickly we can keep penetrating rurally. Our next step would be that we would slowly start covering the entire length and breadth of the country, but that will be in a fairly systematic manner. As I said, once the infrastructure challenge in terms of the charging units, etc., we are able to get that in place. And now we see people. See, when we started getting this vehicle, and I heard someone say very clearly that how much do Indians drive per day as compared to the people in the US? When people started buying these vehicles, it was more for city use. But then we found that there were people who were taking long distance drives on these vehicles, especially in places like Kerala. We had seen people who want to go from here to Pune, further down from Pune to other places, etc. So obviously, we will have to get into the rural markets sooner than later. But that would be a well-calibrated strategy and it will be over a period of time. And we are very careful in ensuring that we don't want the people to feel that if there is no infrastructure available, why are we putting it? So it's like we are working hand in hand with this and ensuring very quickly. But now we see that there are more and more people who are coming up, putting up these charging units, etc. I think we should be there very quickly. But a part of our strategy for sure.
Thanks, Ramesh. Supriya, just will come to you as well to complete this thought. Now, scooter, two-wheelers are essentially being shorter driven and typically will not have the high capacity charging needs. My sense is that the non-metros probably have better access to home charging because of lack of high density housing essentially. Do you see that getting reflected in how the demand for you is coming?
Absolutely. So anyone who's been following Ather would know that how our city expansion plans are going. So we started with Bangalore, then Chennai, then Hyderabad, Mumbai, and after that, out of 11 cities we have, all the rest are tier 2 in a way. Right. And quite interestingly, we are seeing quite a bit of high awareness as well as intent to purchase from the tier 2 cities as well. So places like Coimbatore, Mysore, Hubli, Jaipur, etc. So, so from that perspective, you're right. In fact, that is something now we are also internally caring towards, which is how does the consumer behavior and expectation changes as we penetrate more and more into the tier 2. And how we ourselves have to say modify both in terms like our channel communication as well as the kind of features we develop that actually caters to this segment as it is the urban.
Sure. Now, very quickly, just 1 minute or less. I want to ask both Shripriya, you and Karthikeya. Are there data monetization opportunities available for customers? I mean, we've heard that it's almost become a cliche, right? Data is the new oil. And the fact is all these smart vehicles generate a lot of data. And then the whole sort of issues around the sub 11 kV grid management, where while I mean obviously two-wheelers are small, but charging infrastructure might actually find it easy to at times draw energy from an EV to do a quick balancing of the local grid. Are these kind of monetization opportunities coming the consumer way in near future? Maybe we start with Karthik. You.
Okay, I thought Shiva would like to say one. Okay, yeah. So yeah, let me put it this way. We believe that the data, okay, let's not say the data monetization, probably it's too early to discuss much on that. But that is one thing for sure, that there's going to be a lot of data-driven decision-making processes, which electricity in a digitized format. Yeah, we have been talking about 3D effect, right, in electricity. Decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization, right, or digitization. So when now you convert these electrons into digits, it means that it will be put together into, I mean, the data that you collect will be useful for many of, I mean, both upstream, downstream applications in terms of refining some of the important aspects, such as reliability of electricity. Therefore, a smart energy management system is required. For example, right? Renewable energy integration, solar rooftops likely to come on the charging hubs. How do we going to do a grid balancing using the renewable energy with net metering or gross metering and so on and so forth. Grid to vehicle, but as you just said, it's going to be vehicle to grid, especially for electric buses, electric cars, larger vehicles with larger battery capacities will be put into use. So data from the charging infra point of view is already a very important tool right now. Going forward, in terms of monetization, yes. For example, one of the biggest stakeholder here, who's going to be the buyer of this data or kind of consumer of this particular data, are going to be DISCOMs by themselves. Because as an EV charging company, my raw material comes from DISCOM, but then there's another raw material which I create by myself, like solar photovoltaics and energy storage put together. So for me, currently as data, there are already internal customers within my organization right now. Yeah, and it has been put to tremendous use. For example, there is one discussion going on that if I have to create an electric bus charging hub or an electric freight charging hub, and let's say I want to bring a 3 megawatt of transformer. One of the discussion is, can I do with 60 kilowatt connection, not 3 megawatt, just 60 kilowatt connection, and charge the entire battery bank, and the battery bank then gives the electricity to the buses. So you are actually doing away with the entire power infra in one shot. Now this is so how we are going to reach to this conclusion? You're only going to reach the conclusion by doing the things, by analyzing the information data generated from the previous experience and taking it forward. So I would say there are a lot of internal customers at our end to start with. Yeah.
Sure. And Shripriya?
Yeah, I was smiling earlier because it's actually a pretty interesting question. At the same time, it's tough. I mean, irrespective of whatever we say as the possibilities. But at least what I have seen based on the sort of inquiries that have started coming in is starting with a little bit of an indirect monetization for the customers. So something like a usage-based insurance, which has picked up a lot in probably markets like US, has not happened a lot in India. But that kind of thinking has started happening, where companies are thinking about fintech products around this. Similarly, something like monetizing the data by customer giving a consent to share their data with these data companies that collect, the places of interest where the customer has traveled. It happens. It's common with mobile apps, like some of the applications on apps, right? Similarly, vehicles have a certain unique kind of data points that is also possible. But to be very honest, for that the market has to be, or like the adoption has to be big enough for the monetization at scale to happen. With just a few thousands or tens of thousands, it's not going to be sufficient to create a product at this point for them. Regarding your question about this reverse charging, very frankly, we haven't thought about it for a two-wheeler in terms of what's the potential, for two-wheelers to be contributing towards something like grid balancing. Considering like range anxiety is the first thing we want to solve. So yeah, so still honestly, no answer there.
Yeah. No, this is not really a two-wheeler play. It's more like a bus play, as Karthikeya ji mentioned. So finally, coming to Abhijit, and I purposely kept you towards the end. Now, effectively, I see your role is almost like the operating system provider to the other folks on this call. So from, if I look at it from that mobile operating system kind of a perspective, what are some of those, key concerns that, plague this whole sector? And again, from the kind of platform services, which, for example, can help drive standardizations, data monetization opportunities, and Sulaiza earlier talked about the whole location-based intelligence, which is providing. How do we bring it all together into this platform, which will then, help everybody essentially work seamlessly together?
Thank you. It's very, very engaging conversation, and I really enjoyed it. I've taken lots of notes. So look, what you said is right. So we are very horizontal. We cut across various key stakeholders ecosystem, from the manufacturers to regulator to the battery tech to the operators, etc., etc. So that's definitely we are there, because location by definition is where anyone is. So the way I look at it is, one is the ecosystem itself will drive lots of requirement of change management. When I say, be it, all these key stakeholders, and especially the consumers, they have to go to the change curve from, when we are they're looking something and looking for something which is new, and managing that anxiety and the excitement and the post-purchase dissonance, and all of these behavior they have to manage, the consumer has to manage. So what we do is as we are listening to various interesting data points, and I picked a few, and which is very powerful. For example, I think Ashwin mentioned, Yugandhar, you mentioned 45 to 50% of the wastage. The cost is attributed to the last mile, for example, for the entire trip cost. Or I think someone mentioned about $10 to $14 billion, which is kind of waste when the last mile is not effective, or if there is wastage. And I think others also mentioned, and Ramesh, you mentioned about the scaling and a deployment of this ecosystem, and Supriya, you also mentioned a few interesting points around the two-wheeler behavior. So if you look at all of these important points and interesting points as well, so we play a role which is very horizontal. So we cut across. So we help the consumers in a big way. We help them to reduce their anxiety. We are helping the ecosystem to kind of plan better, maybe from the discoms, how they should plan, or the deployment of EV charging stations, and how they can be more effective. We also, coming back to your questions around the platform and the opportunity for monetization, I think, and one of the panelists mentioned about the analytics. I think it was you, Vineet, you mentioned about the analytics piece, right? It's huge. Because it's the kind of data it is being generated, and how those correlation can be used, and how then the ecosystem can benefit from each other. Rather, of course, there is an opportunity to make money, but if you think of how, if one set of data helps the other player in the ecosystem, that's also immense, rather than them investing and fighting some details. So yes, our the location platform provides the opportunity as a marketplace as well as a workspace. So where you can bring your own data, and you can curate the data and help with the other data which can come from the various stakeholders in the ecosystem, and of course in the marketplace where you can put the data and you can monetize in future. Supriya has mentioned about UBI. UBI is already in a reality in many other markets. It probably need a bit of a participation from the financial services or the insurance operators, but it's definitely coming together. It's a real kind of a convergence happening in terms of connectivity, because all these EVs, be it two-wheelers and four-wheelers, will be connected vehicles. It has to be connected vehicle. So there has to be kind of a connected side of it, and then of course it's generating data, and those data can be then pollinate with other set of data, etc., and then create as kind of an ecosystem in itself. it's pretty exciting time, as I think I would say. And we're happy to be part of this ecosystem. I think we are starting something very exciting. It's that is moment in history where we're coming together and creating something very, very new as a service. So very excited.
Yeah. No, thanks for that answer. I do have a follow-up question on that as well. So you mentioned, the whole marketplace essentially. Do you see, or maybe if you've seen this emerge in, let's say, Western Europe or the advanced economies where smart mobility is already fairly well established, something like an API economy come up, where different OEMs could just subscribe and start using those services. Do you see that happening? Is it on near horizon in India? Will we gain from it?
I think so. I think so because for example, and it will be very there's a need for that as well. So there is always will be a need of a specific API which would come out of a certain set of services generated out of certain set of information. For example, if we have a battery infrastructure company, and I think Ashwin, from your side, for example, enterprise mobility, or if you think from battery tech perspective, those can be used as services as well and be consumed by the ecosystem. If there's, for example, if this POIs which are very relevant to the EV ecosystem, if a service provider has that set of information, why not? And they can give that API as a service through an API, and our platform facilitates that, and kind of other players also kind of contribute and be part of that services as well.
Sure. Thanks, Abhijit. Yeah. So I think we have a few questions on the Q&A chat. So let me just pick up some of these. Okay, Binu mentions that there is the ingress protection standards adopted globally, but it is not followed in India as yet. And when will ISO 20653 2013 be adhered? Ramesh, would you have insight on that?
Not exactly. I can get back, but not exactly.
Sure. Supriya, is this something that your firm bothers about, or it's too premature for the standard in India?
No, we do, but I'm probably not the best person on this aspect.
Sure.
But I think the broader question about, I believe it was like breakdown due to basically submerging in water, right? So those are things we actually have tested, like for battery as well as our dashboard. So for example, a dashboard has like IP67 standard. So there is a certain, which basically defines that how long can that component be within say 10 meters or a certain depth of water without getting affected. So those are things or conditions that our vehicles are all tested.
Yeah. And I think earlier in the panel, we did discuss that probably India may not be able to directly apply these standards of the Western world, given that our demands and our economic models are probably quite different. Yes, Karthikeyan.
Yeah, I guess I have a very different opinion on this, because it's not about Western Europe, it's about the safety, right? So just imagine that most of the vehicles never had airbags. Right? I don't want to name some of the biggest brands globally, when they enjoyed the largest market share in India, never bought airbags. Now, this is very startling, right? Now, it all boils down to DHI, MORTH, ARI, everybody to come together and make it what is compulsory or imperative for the safety. Now, if we specifically about this ISO 20653, the IP protection that you require for a vehicle, I think is reasonably there. Now, obviously, there are relevant BS standards also which are mirrored up. And so if you talk about if we talk about ingress of water and other things in the vehicles, it is very much there. And many of the vehicles are following. Maybe they were not writing it down, and they will never write it down for a consumer product. Because there are so many hundreds of standards being adhered to. So not necessarily they write it down. But yes, the IP protection standards for the vehicles are fully in adherence. It's a question about a charging issue, actually, because people do ask, are you going to put up a canopy or not? So that's where the IP standards are more relevant in terms of the choice. But on the vehicle side, I think it's getting very serious. And I guess very recently, the central government has made the safety the highest priority, especially when they are looking at some of the most famous results where the cars are getting published the results, the test results, the crash or safety results of the vehicles getting published openly, I think it's getting more serious now. So yes, IP for the road vehicles is very much there.
Sure, thanks. I think there's a related question from Binu again, that there's a specification called the true range for EVs, but same is not adopted in India. So are there plans? Again, I mean, Rameshji, you might be best suited for this.
So what the Indian OEM generally follow is go by what the range is given by ARA. It's the norm that has been there across, and I don't think we intend changing it at this point of time. Of course, on the Nexon, there have been some things that have gone in the press, etc. We have gone ahead with 312, but that is a certified range that we got from ARA, right? And it happens even in ICE vehicles. So obviously, you promised 26, and we make ICE and EV, so I can say with authority that all the manufacturers claim, and that's all under ideal test driving condition, ideal driving conditions. So obviously, there are people who have got closer to 300, 280, 290. There are people who have got 220, 230. But then it's what we go and announce, and that's been the general trend that's been followed. And we propose to follow the same thing, which is go with the ARA certified range. That would be my answer.
Sure. Thanks. I think there is this question on, okay, like the EU has forced smartphones to adopt USB-C, will there be similar sort of push on charging protocols? I think the view of the panel was that there should be standardization, but again, this is I think targeted more towards Ather. So Supriya, I'll let you respond.
Absolutely. Like I said, we ourselves are looking forward to that. We were forced to develop our proprietary standard because the European or other global standards that are there today do not apply well for India, both commercially as well as for two-wheeler or three-wheeler segments. So we are also constantly in touch and working with the regulators to work towards defining standard for two-wheelers and three-wheeler EVs.
Yeah. So I would want to just sort of add on, Vaibhav, if you could come in here. Could, for example, creating a national standard on charging itself become a source of IP revenue for India when we start exporting the vehicle? Given the size of the essentially market in India, it is now among the largest in the world. Should that be a play that we as an industry actually look at? And essentially meaning also being different from the rest of the world.
Can you come back with your question? I didn't get you saying the standardization can help
of the charging protocols. So, for example, if India industry as a consortia or with government push creates an India standard for charging, which could then become a source of IP revenue for firms like you, OEMs, as we start exporting these exporting it out to other markets.
Of course, I mean the standard will have to be somehow matching with some form of global standards, and if there's a benefit with that, and with the economy of scale of manufacturing over here of the let's say a connector standard, then of course I think the export opportunity would be there.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay, I'll just pick up next one. How is vehicle data helpful in scaling the charging infra across geographies? I think Abhijit, you might be best placed to take this up.
Sure. No, yeah, absolutely. So there are, as I was mentioning earlier, so the vehicles are going to generate various types and kinds of data. For example, how the vehicles are being driven, or how the vehicles or the drivers itself, and how's the driving behavior of a two-wheeler or four-wheeler, and then also what kind of routes are being used by the drivers as well, and which is then dependent on various other conditions as well. So not only the charging infrastructure information, but it also depends upon the time of the day and the day of the week, or the traffic information, or seasonality, etc., etc. So all of these kinds of set of information, which otherwise anyways location tech being used by location tech, or location tech supports this such kind of usage. And then if you think of a connected vehicle, which is battery driven as well. So absolutely, it will also help the companies which is going to support the infrastructure, be the government or the discoms or even the deployment. Those who are doing that, they can use those set of information. Some of them will be static, but then also on top of it could be certain dynamic set of information.
Sure.
Is it in a certain, it's festival, does it drive a certain kind of behavior?
Yeah.
Or weather, for example, is it driving certain kind of behavior? Like Delhi, for example, in the winters is fog, right? Would it play another set of variables in driving behavior?
Got it. Thank you. How significant is localization of data analysis and data storage? I think maybe Vineet, you might have the best insights considering you are working large scale with this data.
Yeah. So I'm assuming it is related to the data privacy, similar to compliances like GDPR in Europe, right? So I think it is still too early in India, but the way things are moving, especially from the government point of view, right? Data privacy is becoming an issue. And especially when you look at two-wheelers, right? Or maybe passenger vehicles. And then we also need to track those EV data, right? I mean, in real time, right? So I think that will become a big challenge to how to store and what kind of a security, encryption, or you can say whether it's being stored in India itself, right? Because that is something which is going to come sooner rather than later in India as well, similar to what Europe and other Western countries are.
Thank you. Okay. What role does last mile SIM internet connectivity play in the expansion of connected vehicle program? And can M2M SIM value adds to the existing offering? I think the short answer seems to be yes to the second part. But again, Ramesh, would you want to take this up?
Sorry, could you just repeat? I logged out for a couple of seconds actually.
Yeah, no problem. So the question from Puneet is, what role does last mile SIM or internet connectivity play in the expansion of connected vehicle program? And can M2M SIMs value add to the existing offering?
Oh, yeah, exactly. I think we've done a lot of research and work on that, and it does play a very key role, especially in our fleet vehicles, etc., that we are selling. And it does play a very, very critical role. In fact, there is a manual that we have prepared at our end on how this can, and we are engaging ourselves very, very closely with these operators. I think that brings a huge amount of value, and this is being seen as a value that's been added on the vehicle by all the customers and the buyers, etc. And we propose taking it further on this. So very useful for us.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, we have the question from Yash Jethani, Yash from IDC. How do you view telecom operators in the entire ecosystem with EV themselves acting as moving secondary edges? Okay, that's an interesting sort of twist to this. A lot of standardization can be driven by telcos. Maybe Abhijit, do you have a view on this?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Look, as I said before in my, the previous comments, it's a world of convergence, because as the vehicles are getting more and more connected, the operators play a role. Well, right now we're talking about 4G in India, and there will be this vehicle-to-vehicle connectivity, vehicle to V2X kind of a connectivity will play as well as important role as well. So and they will help the ecosystem as well as bring this connectivity in the picture. The geographies where we do see 5G is coming in some of these countries we've already as 5G has come in. It's then goes to the next level because a few other applications can run on top of these connected vehicles. There is a very different experience there.
Yeah. So just adding on this question also to Rushabh, do you see that as a new business opportunity, converting your buses into sort of a mobile hotspot?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and there are a lot of such opportunities, both in terms of telco as well as media, sort of content streaming and content storage. And at this point, we haven't looked at it because honestly, to do something like this, you would require a large scale. But it is definitely interesting. And even regarding the previous question in terms of the end-to-end SIMs, I think, and Vineet would, I think, agree with this, is that everything is now, there is no difference between sort of an offline and an online device. Everything is pretty much now online.
Always on.
And we've moved to a always on sort of, mesh network, be it vehicles, be it any other form of infrastructure that is available. So I think I agree with Abhijit that there is convergence, and there will be interesting opportunities that we don't foresee today that will come out of this convergence.
Yeah, that's the fun of the digital age. So I think we have just time left for one more question. And the question I see is, how do you manage grid stability in a country such as India, which is not, actually we are surplus electricity, but I'll let Karthikeya respond to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess surely there is a surplus of electricity. There's no doubt about it, because our generation capacities outsizes the consumption capacity. Yes, but there's a big question coming up on the grid stability because of two reasons. We have a huge addition of renewable energy, which is coming up big time. And I think no price to guess that the only way to stabilize this more and more addition of renewable energy capacities through storage and other things. But if you really see EVs, and if you just take a small calculation, I mean, you just no really big numbers to be analyzed here. So if, let's say, Delhi, city of Delhi becomes 30% EVs in next 10 years, then the current consumption of 3,000 megawatt a day or 3,000 MWh per hour goes twice, 2x times. Now, where are those discharging points? So charging, but from DISCOM point of view, it's the point of discharge, right? So where are you going to have those plug points built up in such a, I mean, if we talk about Delhi, then obviously it's a huge territory, but from the DISCOM point of view, it's such a small territory to pack another 3,000 megawatt in next 10 years, which means that it calls for, there's only one way to do it. It calls for a huge structural reform in terms of design, in terms of the energy or smart energy metering tools and so on and so forth, which is fortunately happening now, because as we say, as we digitize each electrons, because we are quantifying electricity into a digital, data. So I think eventually it will help us. But yes, I think the need of an hour, which I believe is also adopted into the new draft of the Electricity Act, electricity rules as we speak, is going to come before the parliamentary committee very soon. So this is probably going to be one of the biggest reform in last 20 years. The last one was in 2003. Yeah. So with a multitude of multifaceted approach by the central government and state government and other industry stakeholders together, I guess we'll have a solution very soon in terms of both renewable energy integration as well as the new EV as a standalone customer to be the biggest consumer of electricity in India and globally as well.
Thanks, Karthikeya. Okay, remaining two questions, I'll quickly take them within a minute and then give it back to IMI. What's the prospect of EV battery swap centers and battery recyclers? The environmental protection is kind of weak. I think that is something which is works in progress. EVs are still not really taken off, and with the vehicle scrappage policy and all coming in, that's something the government will address. And the final question, Anonymous, is today all data pipelines are based on cellular mobile networks. Does it make sense to have a separate communication network? Now, the answer, I think the easiest answer would be 5G is actually meant for mobile to mobile, for machine to machine communication. It's an extremely low latency network. The trials are kind of starting. Mobile telecom sector is a little stressed in India, but hopefully, as the trials go, we will see 5G becoming the default for these connections. So with that, thank you, everyone. Thanks, panel, for such an insightful discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure so did our audience. With that, I hand it back to you, IMI.
All right. Thank you so much. The discussion was very insightful, full of learnings and key takeaways. We hope you all enjoyed being a part of it. I would request Ms. Saliza to just share the PPT. Till then, I'll request Mr. Abhijit, if you can just give certain closing remarks.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you, Satnik. Thanks a lot for conducting this session. It was very, very lively and helpful to kind of articulate various points. Thanks all the fellow panelists. There's been excellent learning for all of us, and hopefully for all the audience as well. I also want to thank IMEI for setting this up. This is something which is it's coming and then upcoming as well. So we need to get various stakeholders together, share the thought leadership and share our opinions so that we can, make a very meaningful journey in the EV sector in India. Thanks for your time. And I just wanted to kind of, please give us feedback. There is a QR code which is on the screen. This will help us to improve in future. And please let us know if any particular topic you want to, deep dive and ask us. And they are all, experts who would love to provide you answer. Thanks for your time.
So on behalf of IAMI, I would like to thank the moderator, Mr. Shatrik, our esteemed set of panelists, and the audience for taking our time to join us today. I would also like to thank the Hero Technologies team for having the faith in us. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all from us. Thank you, and please stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
Thanks, everyone.